We're back at the Methane Moment Pavilion at COP26, and I'm so pleased to have with me Jason Anderson from the ClimateWorks Foundation. He is a program officer, and he directs the work of the foundation on super pollutants, including, of course, methane, which we're here to discuss today. And ClimateWorks Foundation, Jason, was one of the very first funders to focus on this issue and supported critical early civil society networks, including in the US and Canada. And I'm curious if you can share what you think of the growing global momentum, including this global methane pledge.
Well, obviously, it's fantastic when you've been working on something for a while to see that kind of energy coming in. And to have over 100 countries signed up to the pledge and so many coming in right here at the COP in the last minute as well, just showing that enthusiasm and also the role of these events as a forcing function. But then behind that, the philanthropic commitment really is very gratifying. And it does speak to the kind of role that philanthropy can have in preparing the way for something to scale up.
Absolutely. And what recommendations would you have to this growing global network of civil society organizations and perhaps other philanthropists as we try to seize the momentum created by this pledge?
Well, there are a lot of opportunities. Again, because of the great work by Clean Air Task Force, CDF, and others, there's a lot of science that's out there, a lot of relationships that have been built. And so the ground is ready for those that want to come in and support work. But there's also a lot that needs to be expanded on. So we have the technical capacities are really getting ramped up with the addition of satellites to be able to have the data that you need in order to know where emissions are coming from and whether or not pledges are being lived up to. And of course, that's going to generate all kinds of data that then needs to be processed and people need to know what to do with it, which is a super important step. And you need to be able to know at the ground level, can you verify that? And at the ground level, of course, are people. And so those are people in communities who are facing the kind of pollution that comes from methane that need to be incorporated. So there are these areas that we've kind of touched on at the surface that we can now go into great depth all the way across the piece.
I like it. And philanthropy has the ability to sort of act quickly and take risks. And I wonder if you have thoughts on that in sort of the methane context, and also if you can reflect on the Kigali Agreement, which was one of the big landmark successful environmental international agreements, and the related philanthropic fund. Any lessons from that experience that you can share for the methane community?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, there are these two roles that philanthropy can play around an issue. One is that seeding work that may not have its moment yet, but it might get there eventually. And fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it with methane, we knew it was like a really super pressing problem. Yep. So we just had this sense at some point there's going to be this realization, it's going to mature and people are going to turn to it. And the impact that it has as the main lever for addressing global warming in the next decade is unassailable. And so we had this sense that it was going to come about. But at the same time, methane is part of a system of pollution that affects people at the ground level in their human health, the crop productivity. And so there are ways in which methane and other super pollutants, as you mentioned the Kigali Amendment, HFCs, also black carbon, are a set of pollutants that have ways in through different types of interest, whether that's health, environment, et cetera. And so I think preparing the ground with the science, developing the ties in the community, means that the other role of philanthropy, which is to kind of pile in when the moment is ripe and to get behind it, as we're seeing now, is really paying off. And then in terms of the Kigali Amendment, we had a similar type of moment in some ways where getting the amendment over the line, having the backing of philanthropy to say that there are people willing to implement programs on the back of that agreement and giving some confidence to countries and others was, I think, an important part of reaching that deal. What's interesting is that in doing that work, and that was a group of more than a couple dozen philanthropies and individual donors who came together to support the work of what's now called the Clean Cooling Collaborative. And in that work, it throws up a lot of issues that maybe aren't apparent just at the surface. So the moment that Kigali represented was, okay, as we're phasing out HFCs, let's make sure that we take advantage of the opportunity to improve the efficiency of this air conditioning and cooling equipment. But it doesn't mean that it's just a technical issue, because there are so many people without access to cooling services. And it means that you're confronting this issue where we're confronting across many issues in this building, is that there are so many people underserved that you don't want to turn directly to, we need to stop this happening. And in fact, we actually want to extend services to those people at the same time we're reducing emissions. And there's a kind of parallel to that in methane, which is to say that there are a lot of countries with their national oil companies who are in a pretty difficult spot because they rely on that income. And of course we have to reduce methane, but it means that we can't ignore their circumstances, and of course the people that rely on them. Which is why we view that really addressing methane leakage and venting and all of the things that we can ratchet down right now for an immediate impact, which is super important, has to be accompanied by two other pillars to the strategy, which is that we need to be reducing and rolling back the infrastructure of the fossil fuel economy, so that we're not expanding the use of natural gas. In fact, we're reducing the use of natural gas. For example, in shipping, instead of going to natural gas ships, you use something else. And then the third piece of that is that we need to be able to offer the alternatives. So that's why we want to electrify absolutely everything that can be electrified, be as efficient as possible. And then for those few things where we don't have an alternative, then move to other types of fuels, hydrogen-based fuels, for example.
Sure.
And if those three things work together, then they'll be mutually supportive.
Well, you're ahead of the curve on all this, and thank you, Jason, for all of your work. Do you have any thoughts for sort of where we take this next, this global methane pledge? Any sort of general closing comments?
Well, of course, the pledges are fantastic, but now the work begins for the implementers. The folks who've pulled together that pledge and also the philanthropic commitment, that was a huge amount of work, and absolutely kudos to them for doing that. But with that kind of commitment, then, as we've seen over many years in this process, you really have to look at how it's being implemented. And as I say, I think the strength of the organizations behind this, the experience that they already have, put them in a good position to be able to move forward with the funding and reaching out to the countries that have expressed interest and making a lot of progress.
Outstanding. Jason, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today on this busy, busy day at COP26.